I think I'd liken loss to a wound that never heals.
With mom, when I saw God as someone that took something that I was entitled to, and that's where the distance from God came from. I didn't want to serve a God that had taken what he should not have taken.
My mother, before my dad passed, now I guess it's both our parents now, but when mom had passed, and like my mom had been dead for over 15 years, and yet my actions today can still affect her legacy. I felt like I was at a crossroads with God, and I had two choices: either middle finger to God and say, you know what, I'm done, or the other option was just to stay there and just cry.
Hi everyone, welcome to Truth Table. And today I have some amazing guests. I have my brother PJ, Pastor Jimmy with me, and I have my sister, Pastor Tobes. How you guys doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Today we're going to be talking about loss. One thing that we have experienced as a family is loss. And icebreaker. I'll do an icebreaker. PJ, I'll start with you. What would you liken loss to? If you could liken it to a feeling or to, what would you liken it to?
Well, let's see. Loss. I think I'd liken loss to a wound that never heals, but you just kind of learn to live with it. Or almost like if anyone's had like an amputation, like you losing a part of yourself, losing a limb. You know, it never grows back, but you adapt. So I think that's what I would liken loss to.
Thank you for that. Pastor Tobes.
Probably like a storm or tornado that just literally uproots your life as you know it and changes it completely. And having to navigate life in a completely different way, just reprioritizing the things that you had, questioning the things that you had believed, it kind of makes you have to step back. And I think also with a storm or a tornado, after it's ended, it requires people to come back together again to rebuild. And I think that's also a very significant part of loss and grief is the support around you as well.
Sure.
Loss as a Christian. You know, we are born again Christians. We've been born in the church, believe the word. In some instances, in fact, we have experienced loss in our lives, I think about 4 times. 3, 4 times. Yeah. In some of these cases, we did what the Bible said we should do. And I get DMs asking me, oh, I just lost my mom. I just lost my dad. I don't know what to do. I don't trust God. I just want to throw it open. How did you feel? Because we've been Christians all our lives. We've trusted, we've loved God, and we have experienced it. And I'll take it back to mom. Tobi, like when the whole mom situation happened, you were young. You were 15.
Yeah.
You were Christian. I believe by that time you knew the Lord, you loved the Lord.
Yeah.
How did you process that loss? And how has it made you who you are today in Christ?
I think there were layers to it. And I think I've written about this quite openly on Instagram, so people wouldn't be surprised to hear this. But there was my belief as a Christian and what I believed about God and what he would allow and not allow. There was also the perspective of mom, what she was doing. She had dedicated her whole life to God. And there was a sense that as a family, our whole life was about God. So I went through different layers in terms of my processing. The first one was anger towards God because she was doing his work when she died. She had gone for administration. So there was that sense of why would you allow this to happen to her, given that she wasn't doing anything bad or reckless. She was serving you.
Yeah.
And you let this happen to her. And there was also anger from the perspective of hearing other people talk about near-death experiences, but God saving them, and thinking to myself, you could save them, but you couldn't save her. And then also just kind of, as a Christian, what I believed, it really shook that. So I think at that point, my perspective of God was good, and it's still good, but good in terms of nothing bad can ever happen. I believed that being a Christian meant nothing bad could ever happen because I'd never experienced anything to that magnitude of hurt before. So there were different layers that I had to process, and part of the processing was identifying those different layers and working through all those different layers and giving myself the grace to realize that it wasn't something that was going to happen overnight. It took me many years to process that. And I guess if there's one thing I want anyone that's listening to this to understand is that there is no timeline for grief. You're not supposed to get over grief after a year or 2 or 3, despite what people around you might tell you, despite the way that people will praise you for being strong when you're not crying or hail you for having strength. There is no timeline for grief, and you can still grieve 10, 15 years later. Grief changes though. So the magnitude of the grief might look different, but it takes a while. And I realized that through processing mom's grief.
That's really good. PJ, we've lost our mom and our dad. Mom's was quite sudden.
Yeah.
And dad, we kind of saw it, happening. In the differences of how it happened, how did you process that grief? And as a child of God, how did you, manage that within the context of, we believe God, we've prayed, affliction will not arise a second time?
The difference, I think, for, like you said, with mom, it was very sudden and no one saw it coming. I think that was my biggest fear in life at the time, was losing a member of my family. And, mom was the most important woman in my life. So, yeah, when that happened, I felt like I was at a crossroads with God, and I had 2 choices: either middle finger to God and saying, you know what, I'm done. This is not what you promised. This is not what you said. Leaving, I'm not doing this anymore. What has this gotten us? Or the other option was just to stay there and just cry and just, and I thought to myself, if I take the other option where I walk away, I'm still going to come back eventually. So why waste my time walking away? Let me just stay here and cry. And, like I said, for me, it was one of my biggest fears. And I remember feeling like, those scenes in movies where you see a soldier in war and he's battered and broken, his shield is somewhere, his sword is there, and he's pretty much lifeless and trying to hold on to the last strings of life, trying to crawl. I felt in that moment that, I felt battered and broken. And I remember in that time God saying, "Get up, soldier, get up." And I'm like, how? And I remember him asking me, he said, "What was your biggest fear?" And I said, "Losing a member of my family." And he said, "Now that that's happened, don't you realize that you're fearless now? It's like the worst has happened.
Yeah.
And now, so what can the devil use to threaten you or scare you anymore? Now you're fearless. Get up." And that was like a light bulb moment. It's like, okay. So, that was tough. But with dad, again, didn't see it coming either. And the man was healthy as an ox, and he had so full of life. You could have, if you'd done a wager, I'd have wagered he'd be 85, still preaching.
Definitely.
When he got old, sit down, because he was so passionate about God and church and his work. So with dad, I have to attribute it a lot to him and the strength that he displayed through his personal losses.
Yeah.
And so I had that example. I had that blueprint. I saw his unwavering faith and unwavering strength. And so now being thrust in a position where I was required to have the faith, it was easy to do that because I'd had such an exemplary model. I remember asking him in April when we went for Pastor Egan's son's wedding, how he had managed to continue in spite of everything he had been through, dealing with the loss of mom and then Pastor Nomti and his sister. Like, how are you still here? And he said, because God hasn't failed me yet. And I was a bit confused. So what do you mean God hasn't failed you yet? Have you forgotten what your life looks like? Let me remind you, you lost your mom at 45, then you lost your wife at 45, then you lost your second wife after 10 years at 48, and then you lost your twin sister a month after. How can you say that God hasn't failed you? And he said, because what would break a lesser man has not broken me. And I said, well, if it's by prayer, you prayed. If it's by faith, you had it. If it's by money, you spent it. You know, all night vigil prayers, constantly praying, believing. It's by nutrition. It's by, you did everything that was there to do. So how do you reconcile doing all you did and yet, you know, watching your wife still pass? And he said, there's a difference between faith and sovereignty. And a lot of people mistake the two. He says, God is sovereign. And if I can get him to do everything I wanted him to do, then he would cease to be sovereign. And if he ceases to be sovereign, then he ceases to be God. And when he said that, I said, okay then. And so for me, having that kind of mindset and navigating through Dad's departure, I knew what I had to do. I knew what was required. I knew that I couldn't afford to fold. I had to see God from a different perspective of his sovereignty. And like the video we saw on Sunday, it always starts with the end. Daddy's talking about starts with the end in mind. So God knew that we would be here, and he had prepared each and every one of us, you know, to navigate these seasons of our life. So I guess that was the difference between mom and dad. Was before mom, it was a shock. Dad, watching him navigate all his losses prepared me, and has allowed me to continue to stand even now.
So for a lot of Christians out there who are experiencing loss, I know loss can be categorized in different ways. There's loss of a child, loss of a parent, loss of a marriage. And it's something that, Tobi, you said, I think you should just expand on. Because sometimes as Christians, we believe that because we're born again, bad things, it doesn't apply to us. It can't happen to us. We've prayed, we've sown the seed, we've done everything according to, and then people will also think, oh, maybe because you're going through what you're going through because of something you did wrong. So God is punishing you. How will you speak to that? You know, for those people who are going through loss and trying to process these emotions alongside with, this is what the Bible says I should do, and I've done them. So what is going on here?
I think the first thing to say is that the way you see God will determine the way you handle your grief. With mom, when I saw God as someone that took something that I was entitled to, took something that belonged to me, took something that he didn't have the right to take from me, that is where the anger came from. That's where a lot of the difficult emotions came from, and that's where the distance from God came from. I didn't want to serve a God that had taken what he should not have taken from me. So in that perspective, God was wicked. God was not a nice person. God wasn't loving. God wasn't compassionate. Because if he was, surely then these things will not happen. So when you put God in that box, grief can be a very difficult place to be, because one of the things you realize when you go through grief is that it strips you of all your coping mechanisms that you have. All of a sudden, all the things that you've done before to help you keep going just do not work anymore. And when you get to that point in your life, the only thing that can help you is God. But if you are distant from God, then you probably feel the most alone that you've ever felt in your whole life. Because while we may all experience grief or loss, like 3 of us are sitting on this couch and we've all experienced grief or loss, our experiences of that has been very different. If I were to talk to Jim about his experience or you about your experience, there will be some similarities, but there will also be some differences. So there is a part of grief that is lonely and
personal.
Is personal to you. And the difference between the way I saw God then and the way I saw God with Dad is because I'd gone through a really long journey trying to understand God through the grief of mom. I got to a place kind of similar to what Jim was saying, where I realized that serving God was not dependent on living this very lovely, easygoing life. And I think with my career as well, you quickly realize that life is very rocky.
Yeah.
It has a lot of ups and downs. It is the nature of life. It is part of living. So to blame God for what is natural to everyone is a disservice to God. And when you look at the Bible and you start reading people who have gone through difficulties in the Bible, where you see the most of God's compassion and love and warmth is when people are in a dark place and the way that God lifts them up. So with that understanding, I began to understand that I wanted to serve God irrespective of. When you get to a place in your life where you start understanding who he is irrespective of, and when you begin to know God and understand God, you realize that he's with you. His word is not, I'm going to help you avoid. Avoidance is a human response to difficulty, not a God response to difficulty. But when we put a human response to difficulty onto God, then it makes him feel distant, like we don't understand him. God's response to difficulty is towards that, right? Because God can use that to expand. There's a term we use in psychology called post-traumatic growth. And we don't talk about that a lot because we talk a lot about post-traumatic stress. We talk a lot about the toll that going through trauma or grief can put on a body, both physically, emotionally, and psychologically. But we don't talk a lot about the growth that can come from going through a process of expansion. Because what grief and loss does is it forces you to widen your perspective, because all of a sudden you are living a life that you never considered you would ever live.
Wow.
And if you can live a life that you never considered you could ever live, then that means there are things that you've never thought of, there are perspectives that you've never had that can be possible. And so with that, I chose to see, and I've spoken about this, the goodness of God in the midst of my troubles. And for the first time in my life, I always admired Dad because he felt like an anomaly.
Yes.
How can you go back and worship when you were in pain, when you were grieving? And for the first time in my life, I understood it because I met the God that meets you in your grief. And he was so compassionate. And for the first time, I really understood that verse in the Bible that says, what is man that you are mindful of him? Because I felt like he took his time. I'm talking about God now. He took his time to talk to me and explain to me why things had happened the way it did with Dad. And I just felt this overwhelming sense of love. But it only could happen because there was a willingness on my part to allow God in to the hurt. And what tends to happen with loss is that our loss hardens our heart towards God. So he is speaking, but we cannot hear him. And when we cannot hear him, that's when all these things of maybe it's something I did, maybe something I did not do, maybe something of the way I've lived my life. But if you notice, all those explanations put the focus on me, but it's never about me. It's always about God and what he's doing and the bigger picture.
Oh, wow.
That's good.
That was good. That
Good.
was really good.
Very, very good.
PJ, I want you to just kind of talk about, I think Pastor Tobi kind of touched on that. Is this something I did wrong? Am I being punished? These are questions that, I get in my DM. Is it, what did I do wrong that God will do this to me? Or, a few people had said, because maybe it's something that we did wrong, that this person has died in our family.
Right.
So yeah, they are serving God, but maybe they did something wrong, so God is punishing them.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
I think it's a very natural thought process when we try to understand why and we begin to infer things because in our minds it just has to make sense. So that's why people will be quick to say they've done something. I mean, a classic example is Job. when his friends came. He said, listen, all this thing that's happening, you say you're a devout man, but clearly you're not. You've done something, because how else do you explain all these calamities coming upon you one after the other? You must have done something. And that is the human mind trying to understand. And when God says, my ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts, and that my foolishness is higher than your wisdom, is the coming into a sense of humility to understand that your comprehension or your understanding will not cut it. You're not even in the same stratosphere of knowledge or information. How do you explain to a 6-month-old, should I say, further maths or algebra or trigonometry or statistics to a 6-month-old?
That happened.
It's impossible. It's the same thing. How does the God of the universe that was in existence before time, that was the beginning of the beginning, explain the complexities of life to a human being that uses less than 10%? That's what it says. Some people say it might be more, but not even the full capacity of your brain. How do you explain? So when you first understand that his ways are not
Always.
our ways, it puts you in a sense of humility. Not feeling like you know. And then also a different perspective on that is sometimes I've come to realize that, when God allows things to happen to us, it is the highest form of, should I say, it is the highest stamp of approval.
Expand
it
on
is
that.
the highest form of confidence, because you must understand that pain is not something you trust with anyone. And it's easy for people to follow him when he blesses it.
Yep.
It's easy for people to be around when everything is good. But when it comes to tough, hard things in life, you don't go to everyone, because you can't trust everyone with pain.
Yep. That's good.
And so when you begin to look at it from that perspective, it's like God allowing us to go through certain things, it is his stamp of approval and confidence, saying, with you, I can trust you with pain. Because Job, devil said, if you remove your hedge of protection, he'll curse you. And he says, no, he won't. He said, touch everything, but don't touch his life. And the devil went to work, but it was that much confidence. God said, listen, this one, you will bend him, but he will not break. Right?
Oh.
And it's not everyone you can trust with pain. And when you begin to realize that, you begin to see that the pain that God allows us to go through is not always about us, but about somebody else. Because then they look at us and say we're such an inspiration. But what inspires them is because we have navigated a level of pain.
Wow.
But God, who knew, from the beginning, knew that he could trust this particular family with pain. And here's what most people don't want to talk about. People have been sold this cookie cutters version of Christianity, where God is a genie and life is cotton candy and rainbows. But he never promises that. He says, he didn't say you'll never have trouble. He says, I'm your present help in the time of trouble. The righteous run in and are saved. There are indications that you will go through trials and tribulations. And so I said, when the storms of life come, build your house on the rock. So everything has shown very clearly that he has never said that you would never go through situations and trials and circumstances. But kind of to touch on what Tobi has said about, post-traumatic growth and expansion, even when it comes to things of God, there are certain levels you will not get to until you go through the doorway of pain.
Yes.
The access into certain realms.
Password.
the
code.
password, the code, the entry
Yep.
into certain levels with God is pain. And you look at Jesus, he says that it was like a lamb to the slaughter. He allowed himself. He laid down his life. But now that you say he was given a name above every other name, why God did that? Because he went to the cross. It was through the cross that he was elevated. It was through the cross that at the mention of his name, every knee must bow.
Yes,
So
sir.
good.
But everybody wants the name, but they don't want the cross. And so it's very easy for people to look at people and say, oh, I love that man's anointing. Or I love his understanding. I love his depth of wisdom and humility and patience. And God, I wish everybody wants to get the hands laid on them, and they want the grace that comes with the transference, but they don't want to pay the price.
Yes, the process.
Jesus said, listen, if it's possible, take this away from me, but nevertheless, not my will. So he had to submit himself, knowing what was coming, because he knew that what waited for him on the other side was bigger and better. You know, and so when you begin to see pain as an access point to greater, when you begin to see pain as a stamp of approval, that God knows that he says, I won't put more on you that you can handle or bear. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. That means he knows the depth of who I am. I don't know the depths of who I am. And like you said, unto you are thrown into murky waters. He's saying the depths of the sea. You don't know your capacity to swim. Or how you survive. Or how you navigate. It forces you to grow. And so God will be introducing you to who you are in these seasons of pain. Your resilience, your strength, clarity, you know, being able to stand, resilience, doggedness, all these things you didn't know. If anybody told us we'd still be able to stand after everything we've been through, we would have laughed them in their face, because we all knew affliction could happen a second time after mom. We just knew it was not going to happen. It's not going to happen, you know. And then we watched as things began to unfold. But God, who knew the end from the beginning, was preparing us for this season of our lives. And so that allows us to swim and navigate the deepest of waters.
That's good. That's good.
Can I say something,
Yes,
PT?
please.
Just going back to your point about when people associate grief to something that I have done or something that has happened, I want to just talk about two emotions that are very natural in grief, which is blame and guilt. A lot of times when you experience grief, it's like you're holding a huge amount of pain and you don't know where to put it. And the two main ways that people process that pain is either through blame, something outward has happened. So either you did this and that's why that happened to me. God, you're the reason why this has happened. Or somebody didn't do their job, or somebody did something wrong, or that person shouldn't have done that. So we either push that pain outward and we blame, or we push that pain more inward, internalize it, and we experience guilt. I should have done. I could have done better. I wasn't, you know, God did this because I wasn't the best servant, or I wasn't the best mother or father, or I wasn't the best whatever it is. So those two things, blame and guilt, they are kind of what we call knee-jerk reactions to guilt or the experience of guilt. And it's normal. And we will all experience that to an extent. The difference between moving through our grief is not sitting there. Recognizing that you're experiencing a natural reaction or response to grief, but they're not holding on to that, because what you then find is that people feel that if they move on, they're somehow being disloyal or they're betraying their loved ones. And so therefore they have to sit in the grief. They have to lament in the grief, because that's the way they show a sense of honor to their loved ones. And then what then happens is that unintentionally they get stuck in that place. And then they're not able to move on. And so they're seeing all these people like, oh, how are you doing it? I'm still here. And every attempt to move comes with another sense of guilt. Oh my gosh, I'm laughing again. Am I allowed to laugh again? Is this something I can do? I don't have my child anymore. I don't have my daughter anymore. I don't have my mother anymore. And that could be a very difficult place to be in. So I just wanted to say that, to say those things are natural. You will experience some level of guilt and blame. But if we recognize it for what it is, that can then help us begin to move forward. And moving forward doesn't mean leaving our loved ones behind. And I think Jim was talking about this. Moving forward is about, how do I now live this life with the physical absence of my loved one, but carrying on the values, the things that made this relationship special, important. It's in, I think it was the spoken word we did for Dad. I think she named it really well. It's in the way that we live our lives after they are dead that we honor them. And when you change your perspective to that, it can really help us begin to move forward in the presence of grief and pain and hardship.
That's so good. Ooh, I'm loving this episode with my siblings. So we have lived our lives center stage, in front of the whole world. We have grieved, we have cried, we have laughed in front of the whole world. How have you handled that? And then, PJ, this is really for you. You then step into our Father's shoes to continue to lead the church while grieving. You are in center stage, you are in pain, and you have a huge responsibility.
Right.
How have you navigated that?
Growing up as a PK, for those who don't know, pastor's kid, you are thrust into a position that you did not ask for, you did not want. You're put on a pedestal that you did not go looking for, and you become the example for every child. And so there is that weight of responsibility and pressure where you feel like your life is not yours because everything you do is scrutinized, and you're always reminded, don't do that. Everybody's watching you. Because if you do A, then everybody has a license to do B, C, and D. You know, so you grew up, we grew up, pressure is part of our life. It's always been there. You know, understanding that your actions were always bigger than you.
Yes.
It didn't affect your shoe, it affected your family name, affected church, it affected the ministry. You know, I'll joke and say that my mother, before my dad passed, now I guess it's both our parents now, but when mom had passed, and like my mom had been dead for over 15 years, and yet my actions today can still affect her legacy. You talk about pressure, you know, and now add that to the mix, and now we're the custodians of the Odukoya name. You know, that legacy. It's responsibility. So I guess we grew up always knowing and dealing with that kind of pressure. But what that does for you is it teaches you very quickly to develop tough skin. You got to have a tough skin. Because if you don't have a tough skin, if you allow everybody's expectations, opinions, praises, tear downs, backlashes, support, if you let it get into you, you literally, it's almost like you become like, slime or Play-Doh. Because human opinion is so fluid. They can love you today and hate you tomorrow. Ask Jesus Christ, right? So if you live your lives for the opinions of people will always praise you as long as you fit the narrative of what they had, the story they have created for you. Now, once you begin to deviate from that, then you begin to see the conflict because this is my expectation of you. And as long as you are playing to my tune and dancing to my rhythm, then I'm clapping for you. But once my rhythm, your rhythm, and my steps begin to go out of sync, then there becomes tension. So I grew up understanding and even realizing it is important, to have that kind of tough skin for your own mental wellness. You got to be able to, someone said, a ship will always remain afloat as long as the water doesn't get into it. You know, people will have opinions and people are entitled to their opinions. So I don't get mad when people say, have to express how they feel about me. If you have a mouth, you're entitled to an opinion. But what I can control is deciding whether your opinion becomes my truth. If I accept your opinion as my truth, then now I allow that water into my ship. So for me, you know, knowing truth, what my truth is, in terms of even talking about stepping into the role. A lot of people believed, it's because I saw funny things online. Someone said, see how they were dancing during the funeral because they knew it was taking over. We knew it was stepping into. Some people said family business. Some people said, is you about to continue the business, or you know, all these funny things. And it was people not realizing or understanding that the way Dad brought us up, he disabused that idea that church was an aristocracy.
Yes. Always.
Just because I'm pastor doesn't mean you be pastor. He said church doesn't work like that. He said, whoever God calls for the next is who he will be.
God doesn't work like that.
And it's not that because, just assume that it is not your inheritance. It was always clear to say that.
Always said that.
And he said, if any one of you would ever step into this role, my desire is that you are so successful in your field, in whatever you're doing, that should you decide to come and take it over, they realize that it is a sacrifice, not because you have no options
And nothing else to do.
and nothing else to do. So we never saw church as our inheritance, and this is, I was telling someone that said, not once all through my father's life did he ever sit me beside him to position me.
Never.
Not once. This is my son. He never once did it. And so, how do I, so with the different, opinions that have swayed, some were against, now some that were my loudest critics are now my biggest supporters. Some people that were my biggest supporters might have now become my biggest critics. I don't allow it to faze me because I'm not in this position because of your opinion. So I know the mandate I have. I know the responsibility I have. And so I find it entertaining when I see these things, but it doesn't affect me. And it's important that I do not allow that water to get into my ship because my ship cannot sink. I have the responsibility to steer the ship for a lot of people. So I don't let that, affect me, to be honest. And how have I navigated it? Like I said, I had a A1 example. Watch dad having to navigate. I remember one of the moments that my respect for dad shot up, not because he was my dad, but I respected him as a man. I remember was when mom passed. I'll never forget it, and, seeing how broken he was internally and just, laying on the floor when there was a bed in his room, it was hard. And I remember the service of songs, and you could imagine the tension and the pain in the room. You could cut it with a knife. It was palpable. It was heavy. And we're trying to sing service of songs, and everybody it was tough. They'd lost the first lady. Church was, and I remember it wasn't part of the program. Dad just grabbed the mic and went up on stage. And those scenes in movies where an army has just lost the battle and everybody's and then the general from nowhere comes and rallies the troops. And all of a sudden it goes from dejected, broken to like courage and bravery. And I watched Dad transform church in less than 30 seconds. And I don't know what he said, but I remember everyone on their feet screaming. I didn't know when I leaped out the chair and was on the stairs talking about, come on, Dad. Come on, Dad. And I don't know. And because he set that tone.
He did. He did.
So I remember just thinking, what manner of man is this? And then when I was shooting Woman King, and then Pastor Nomti went, and his response. And he came and preached 2 services and worshiped. I remember penning that tribute. What manner of man is this? So for me, I've had such a stellar example. And to see that it is possible and it's attainable. And see, you don't have to motivate me. You don't have to. I have seen it from experience and watched behind the scenes how he navigated these. I remember when Auntie Kende passed it, I was with him. So I had to tell him, and I'd kept his phone for a couple of days because I wanted him to rest. And so when I finally, that's when I kept saying no, because I didn't want him to read it or whatever the case is. And I remember when I told him, he just got very quiet, said, hey, Kenny, Kate, it is well. Bishop told me, maybe I said, it is well. Okay. Okay. And that was it. I'm looking at this man, like I'm waiting for the other foot to drop, the other shoe to drop. Sorry, I'm like, okay, now there's going to be, Dad, are you okay? I'm fine. Dad, no, I'm okay. I said, Dad, are you sure? And I'm thinking, are you having a mental breakdown? Like, have you come apart at the seams? Because you just dealt with your wife. Now this is your twin sister,
and he was having a medical issue.
And having a medical issue at the time, but 1 month apart. So Clay, this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. said, Dad, and I said, Dad, I feel like your brain needs to be studied. I started to him, I said, I don't understand how you're like this. And he said, I feel like God has just said, God has given me grace. So he's given me grace in a way that it just kind of envelopes my mind. And so,
He'd always say, God loves me specially.
Oh yeah, the devil hates me. I have it on my phone. The devil hates me perfectly, or devil hates me specially, but God loves me perfectly.
Yes.
And so, like I said, for me, how do I continue? Do this. I've seen my father do it many times.
Yeah.
So when the emotion comes, you feel it and you embrace it. You wipe your tears. Sunday was one. We were standing. I created the video for the Father's Day. I edited it. I'd seen it multiple times. But then sitting there, just being there and seeing it all, the wave of emotion, and I had to hold myself. I was like, I was about to start crying. I was like, I can't be crying on my first Father's Day. And it took me back to a time when I was young, and I remember it was either Father's Day. It must have been Father's Day. And I was looking up at my dad and I was watching him cry. And I was thinking to myself, why are you crying? Your father died many years ago. And just to see, now I understand, because you never get over that. So.
Yeah.
That's so good. I want to ask you a question, Tobes. While PJ was speaking, you know how when your own Christianity is cut out of your experiences, the reason why we do what we do is very intertwined with our post-trauma growth and our own experience. We stand on the altar every Sunday, we preach, not because we're trying to keep face or encourage anyone or make anybody happy.
Nope.
It's birthed from a truth and a knowing, a legacy that was handed down very well through pain, through prayer, through faith. How do you speak on your own how we create our mental fortitude, especially as Christians, from what we've experienced that propels us to continue? And how it's quite different for everyone. And I think you kind of touched on that, but I want you to expand on it a little bit.
Yeah, I'll try my best. If I don't answer the question, let me know. And then I'll try again. I think the first thing to say, as Jim was talking, that I wanted to say is that there are many faces to grief, right? Because there'll be some people listening and thinking, gosh, wow, he's so strong. Wow, look at him continue to go. But there are many faces to grief. And one of the things about being in the public eye is that you only see one dimension of a person. So even though, Jim is talking about the dimension from the public eye, that's just one dimension of who he is.
Yes.
And who you are and who I am. We're multifaceted.
Right.
So the same person that can go up on the stage every day with the knowledge and experience and the models that Jim has had and you have had is a certain person, like Jim was saying, that can see a video of dad and cry. Right? So mental fortitude is not about just powering on. That's an illusion, right? If we just always power on, even biologically, we're going to burn out.
Yeah.
So mental fortitude, or what I'll prefer to call it is resilience, is really our ability to be aware of our bodies and ourselves as we navigate life and experiences, and to be opened to what we experience, both not so good and good, to be able to process it and move on. So just using myself for an example, if after we lost mom and then we lost dad, I didn't allow myself to feel all the feelings again because I was like, no, I should be over this now. We've done this before. We are masters of grief, in quotes. So we should know how to do this. I'll be setting myself up, right? Because that's what tends to happen, is that we all have expectations of how we should deal with things, even when we've never experienced it before, right? So everyone listening, has an expectation of how they believe they will handle this situation if they were sitting in our chairs and they had gone through it.
Yeah.
Right.
But the reality of life is nobody really knows how they will respond until
It happens.
So resilience is it's an active intentionality constantly. How am I feeling? What's going on for me? How am I making sense of it? But what determines how you respond is value. So a lot of what we've talked about today in terms of seeing Dad and how he's navigated grief has shaped our values in terms of how we want to be when we experience grief. And because we have those values, that has given us a sense of direction of where we're trying to go. So, oh my gosh, I feel, wait, Dad's gone, Auntie Kenny's gone, Pastor Norma's gone. This is a lot. Where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Okay, where do we go from here? Our values are tied to what have we seen Dad do? How has he navigated it? Okay, so that's what I want to do. And that's when we start taking the steps towards that, right? So with grief, it's really about understanding our bodies, really leaning into what's showing up. I'm feeling angry. I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to be angry, but I'm angry. What is that about? I'm feeling guilt. I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to be. And I'm saying I'm not supposed to be because another thing we don't talk about as Christians is that we give ourselves rules.
Yes. Why are you crying?
Rules of living.
Don't cry.
I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to be. I'm a Christian. This is how I'm supposed to be. I'm a Christian. And then we narrow ourselves into that box. So we can't do anything else. So I'm not supposed to cry. So I can't cry. I can't cry. I'll just chest it. I'll just hold it in. And one thing I would tell you about emotions is that when you hold emotions in, it's like taking a beach ball and pushing it down in the ocean. You can only hold it down for so long. And as soon as you let go, the same amount of force in which you have pushed it down is the same amount of force in which it will come up. Yeah. And so resilience or dealing with grief is allowing yourself, despite the expectations or rules of living or judgments that you have of how you are supposed to be in those situations, to experience what is coming up for you and to ask yourself, why is this coming up for me? And then in terms of your value, one thing we say as a therapist or a psychologist is you don't start determining what your value is when you're in the depth of the ocean. It's not then they now say, okay,
what is my value?
What's my value now? As the storm is, no. These are the works you have to do even before the thing happens, right? And so as a Christian, what that might look like is really getting to know the word of God for yourself. So when you read things like, David lost his child. And you say to yourself, wow, David lost his child. And how did he deal with that? If it was me, how would I deal with that? We don't like asking those tough questions, but those kind of tough questions allow us to kind of figure out where we're at, right? Because when we then experience those difficulties, if we know what our values are, so if you don't know what your values are, this is the time to know what kind of person would I like to be in difficulty? How would I want my friends and my families to talk about me if I was experiencing a difficult time? What are the ways of being I want to be? So I want to be seen as someone that is striving or still being compassionate to myself or still being there for my loved ones in spite. So what are those things, right? So that when you start experiencing difficulties, you have something to reach to or look at. So I'm feeling angry now, but I also know that it's important for me that in my anger, I'm still able to reach out for God or to worship God or to pray. And then those begin to develop the steps that we take, right? And like I said, resilience is not, and we've talked about this already on this couch, resilience is not the absence of pain. That's not what resilience is. Resilience is our ability to keep going in the presence of pain. So it's an and both. I feel this and I keep going, not either or. I'm either feeling good so I can do things or I'm feeling bad and I don't do anything. Yeah. I don't know if I answered that question.
It's so good. It's so good. I just want to say, Pastor James, Pastor Tobes, I'm very proud of you guys. I think we're doing good.
Proud of you.
We're not there yet. we're resilient, right?
Yeah.
We're getting there. But I know one thing that has kept us and has held us and has made us who we are today is our knowledge of who God is.
Yep.
Our love, knowing the God of our parents. So even when our parents are not around, we still know God.
Yeah.
And if it's one thing I want to leave with you guys out there, loss is part of life. It will happen. But, as we all were speaking, I kept hearing, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will be with you. God could have stopped you from walking through the valley, but he didn't stop.
Yeah.
He let you walk through it. But guess what? He's saying, even while you're walking through it, I am there.
Yeah.
I am with you, and you're definitely coming out. So I hope you've been blessed by this session of Truth Table with my Sibs, Pastor Jim, and Pastor Topes. Thank you guys so much. Love you so much.
Thank
you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. God bless you.
Peace.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.